They said it was just plastic. Light, cheap, nothing special. The kind of thing you toss in a drawer after the war and forget about. But that's how most revolutions start, I guess. Small, ordinary, a little too shiny for anyone to take seriously. I was 28 when my husband came home from the war and the world began telling women like me to sit still again. You've done your part, they said. Now make a home worth coming back to. So I did. I ironed, baked, polished. And yet there was this itch under my skin, like the sound of a radio station just out of tune. I'd spent 3 years running a factory line, balancing accounts, keeping engines moving. Then, suddenly, the only thing I was allowed to run was a vacuum cleaner. One afternoon, I saw a neighbor, Ginny, carrying a box full of pastel-colored bowls that clicked shut like magic. They seal airtight, she whispered, as if sharing a secret recipe. I laughed. Bowls? That's your big excitement? She smiled. No, the party is. That night, I found myself in her living room surrounded by women in floral dresses, kids asleep down the hall, the smell of coffee and talcum powder in the air. A woman stood in front of us, not a salesman in a suit, but someone like us, confident, funny, holding a piece of plastic like it was treasure. This, she said, snapping the lid on with a soft pop, is freedom from leftovers that leak. And maybe a little freedom for you too. The room laughed, but something about the way she said it stayed with me. By the end of the evening, everyone had signed a sheet: names, phone numbers, orders. The woman's name was Brownie Wise. She spoke like a preacher of possibility, not selling containers but belief. It's not just storage, she said, it's opportunity. And for the first time in months, I felt awake. A week later, a box arrived on my porch, pastel bowls, a demonstration kit, and a letter inviting me to host my first Tupperware party. My husband frowned when he read it. Sounds like a gimmick. Maybe, I said, but it's my gimmick. I cleaned the living room like it was Sunday service. Fresh curtains, sandwiches cut in triangles, the good china out even though we weren't using it. I invited every woman on the block, some curious, some skeptical. Plastic? Really? They'd say. Why not sell something useful, like soap? When the night came, I nearly lost my nerve. My hands trembled as I set the table, arranging lids by color, pretending I wasn't terrified. But once I started talking about keeping food fresh, about saving money, about having something of our own, the fear melted like butter on warm bread. And when I pressed the lid onto the bowl and heard that soft, perfect burp, the room clapped. That sound, that silly little pop of air, wasn't just a seal. It was a door opening. Within a month, I was hosting 3 parties a week. I'd never made my own money before, not like that. $10, $20, $50 if I was lucky. I bought new shoes without asking permission. I bought my son a toy truck and didn't feel guilty. But the best part wasn't the money. It was the laughter, the hum of women talking about more than recipes, about possibility. We'd swap tips on sales and stories about the men who rolled their eyes at us. We called ourselves the burpers, half joke, half rebellion. One night after a party, Ginny and I counted our orders by lamplight. She whispered, "Can you believe we're running businesses in our kitchens?" I smiled. They told us to stay home, I said. So we built something right here. By 1952, Tupperware parties had swept across the country. Brownie Wise became a legend, the first woman ever featured on the cover of Business Week. But for most of us, it was smaller than that and somehow bigger. It was proof that a woman could organize, speak, lead, and earn without waiting for permission. Some husbands grumbled, some laughed. Mine finally said, "You're turning the neighborhood into a sales floor." I kissed his cheek and said, "No, honey, into a classroom." Because every time I stood in front of those women, watching them light up with the realization that they could do this too, I felt it. The quiet hum of change, the sound of lids sealing and doors opening, all at once. By the summer of 1953, The sound of that soft Tupperware burp had become the anthem of our little town. Every week, another living room lit up laughter, perfume, the clinking of coffee cups, and the rustle of order forms being passed from hand to hand. It didn't feel like selling. It felt like waking up. We were wives, mothers, church volunteers, women who'd been told our world began and ended at the kitchen door. But these parties gave us something that felt radical. Even if we didn't have a word for it yet, we were learning to speak not just to each other, but for ourselves. I remember one evening in particular. The cicadas were loud, and the air smelled like jasmine and hot dust. I had 12 women packed into my living room, every seat taken, the last few sitting cross-legged on the floor. I started my demonstration the same way Brownie Wise had taught us: smile, believe, and listen. I told them how each lid burped to lock in freshness, but what I really meant was freedom to contribute, to decide to earn. When I pressed the lid down and heard that soft pop, the room clapped. But this time, something shifted. The applause wasn't for the bowl, it was for us. By fall, my husband had built me new shelves in the garage for the boxes that came each week. The mailman started calling me the lady with the pink bowls. I'd never had a title before. I didn't mind this one. The parties grew larger. We'd move furniture, borrow chairs from neighbors, even use the church basement when the crowd got too big. Women came from 3 towns over, wearing their best dresses, bringing friends, bringing stories. Some were shy at first, but by the end of the night, they were taking orders, planning their own parties. We laughed at the way the men teased us. What's next? The Women's Plastic Union. They didn't know how close they were to the truth. One afternoon, I got a letter from Tupperware headquarters in Florida. It wasn't just an order confirmation. It was an invitation to the annual Jubilee, a gathering of top sellers from all over the country. The envelope shimmered with promise: airfare, hotel, a week of recognition and celebration. I'd never flown before, never even left Ohio. But when I told my husband, he just looked at me for a long time. Well, he said finally, guess I'll be making my own breakfast that week. I packed my best dress and my biggest dream. Florida was like another world: sunshine, palm trees, colors that didn't exist back home. And there she was, Brownie Wise, in a pink suit, heels sinking slightly into the grass, her smile as bright as the banners that read, "You can do it too." She spoke to a crowd of hundreds, women of every age, every town, every story. She told us we weren't just selling products, we were selling possibility. Every lid you close, she said, holding one up to the light, is another door opening for a woman who thought she had none. I felt tears sting my eyes. I wasn't alone in that. When she handed me a small trophy for my sales, gold paint over tin, shaped like a tiny bowl, I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up folding catalogs, counting coins, believing in something invisible but real. It wasn't just plastic anymore. It was pride. When I came home, something had changed. Not the house, not my husband, not even the town, but me. I walked taller. I spoke louder. I stopped asking permission. The parties kept coming, but they felt different now. It wasn't just about selling bowls. It was about connection, a circle of women learning from each other, cheering for each other, daring to dream a little bigger. We started mentoring newcomers, teaching them how to host, how to handle rejection, how to stand their ground. Don't let anyone tell you it's just plastic, I'd say. What we're building here is something they'll write about one day. I didn't know how right I was. But every revolution has its shadows. Some husbands grew jealous. Some preachers muttered that our parties were a distraction from family values. Even Brownie herself began clashing with the men in the company who didn't like how much power she held. Still, we kept meeting living room by living room, kitchen by kitchen, rewriting what womanhood could look like, one pop of plastic at a time. Because we knew something the men didn't. Progress doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it giggles over coffee. Sometimes it sounds like a soft burp and a room full of women smiling like they've just discovered the future. By 1956, I was selling more plastic than I ever thought possible. My living room had turned into a warehouse of pastel bowls, catalogs, and dreams stacked high enough to touch the ceiling. The phone rang constantly. Women from 3 counties called to join my team, and I'd sit at the table teaching them the same thing Brownie had taught me: smile, listen, believe. I was proud and a little tired. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that comes from success, not the kind that puts you to bed, but the kind that keeps you awake at night, wondering when it will all fall apart. Some nights, I'd walk into the kitchen, flick on the light, and just stare at the neat rows of containers lined on the shelf. They gleamed like trophies, but sometimes they felt like cages, perfect, sealed, and airless. The women I'd once laughed with started calling me Mrs. Henderson instead of Mary. Meetings became competitions. Who sold the most this month? Who earned the new mixer, the free trip, the diamond pin? I didn't blame them. We'd all been raised to chase approval, to measure worth in applause and paychecks. But somewhere along the way, the laughter that once filled our living rooms began to sound rehearsed. At the annual jubilee that year, Brownie Wise herself arrived late. She looked different, more polished, more distant. The woman who'd once spoken about freedom now spoke about quotas. The future, she said from the stage, belongs to those who never stop selling. The crowd cheered, but I felt something twist inside me. Was this the future we'd built or the one we'd been sold? Back home, the parties grew quieter. Some of the women had gone back to work or started small shops of their own. Others stopped hosting altogether, saying their husbands didn't like the attention. I tried to keep the spark alive: coffee, laughter, a little music on the record player, but it felt forced. One night, after a slow party, Ginny stayed to help me clean up. We'd been doing this together since the beginning, two dreamers with aprons and ambition. She sighed as she stacked the bowls. Feels different now, doesn't it? I nodded. It used to feel like we were building something. Now it feels like it's building us. She looked at me, tired, wise, a little sad. Maybe that's what happens when you start winning. I didn't know how to answer. In 1957, the news hit us like a dropped dish. Brownie Wise was out, fired, erased. Her name removed from company literature overnight. The woman who had turned living rooms into boardrooms was gone, replaced by men in suits with promises of new direction. We wrote her letters, hundreds of them, but few reached her. The company told us to move on, to keep smiling, to sell. But it wasn't the same without her. I realized then that she hadn't just sold bowls, she'd sold belief. And when belief leaves the room, even the strongest seal can't hold things together. One evening that fall, I sat alone at my dining table, surrounded by unsold stock. The air was heavy with the smell of plastic and disappointment. My husband walked in, took one look at me, and said gently, "You could stop, you know." I shook my head. I wouldn't know what to do with myself. He smiled. Maybe that's the point. So I took a break. For the first time in years, I didn't host a single party. I read books, baked bread, walked through the quiet neighborhoods where I used to ring doorbells and talk about freshness. The silence felt strange, then peaceful, then right. Because underneath all the sales and slogans, I realized what had kept me going wasn't the money or the trophies. It was the women, the laughter, the way we made each other feel seen. One afternoon, Ginny dropped by with a box. Inside were old Tupperware bowls, faded now, scratched, their shine long gone. "I thought you might want these," she said. I smiled. "They've lasted longer than some of us." She laughed softly. That's what happens when something's made right. After she left, I sat at the table holding one of those bowls, the same pastel pink I'd first demonstrated a decade ago. The lid still made that perfect little pop when I pressed it down. I couldn't help but smile. It sounded like memory, like friendship, like the echo of something that had mattered once and still did, even if the world had moved on. The years slipped by quietly as softly as the sound of that little burp that once echoed through my living room. By the time the 1970s arrived, my hands had grown slower, my hair grayer, and most of the women I'd once sold beside had gone their separate ways. Some moved to new towns, some became grandmothers. A few, sadly, were no longer here. The company had changed too. There were television ads now, fancy new models, bright colors that looked more like toys than tools. But the heart of it, the warmth, the laughter, the sisterhood that had faded long before the shine of the plastic ever did. Still, on quiet afternoons, I'd find myself wandering to the cupboard, running my fingers over the stack of bowls that had followed me through every chapter of my life. Their colors had dulled, their lids a bit warped from time, but they still sealed tight, a testament to how well they were made and how much they'd seen. Sometimes I'd lift one lid, just to hear that old familiar sound. It always made me smile. People might have called it just plastic, but to me, it was the sound of women believing in themselves, of friendships sealed tight and dreams that refused to spoil. One spring day, my granddaughter, Lucy, came to visit. She was 16, full of life, her hair tied in a high ponytail the way we used to wear it in the 50s. She followed me into the kitchen and pointed to the old containers lined neatly on the shelf. "What are those?" she asked, wrinkling her nose with a grin. "Oh, these?" I chuckled. "They're Tupperware. We used to sell them, back when I was your age." "You sold plastic bowls?" She laughed. "Yes," I said, smiling. "But it wasn't really about the bowls." She tilted her head, curious. "Then what was it about?" I thought for a moment, then handed her one of the faded pink ones. "Hold this," I said. "Now press the lid down until you hear it burp." She did, and when that soft pop filled the room, her eyes widened. "There it is," I whispered. "That sound used to mean something. It meant women could do more than anyone believed we could." Lucy looked at me thoughtfully, the way only the young do when they realize history isn't just in books. It's sitting right across the kitchen table. That night, after she'd gone home, I sat alone with my cup of tea, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. On the counter, the pink bowl gleamed under the yellow light. I thought of Brownie Wise, the woman who started it all, who taught us to believe, and who'd been forgotten too soon. I thought of Ginny and the long drives, the laughter, the endless cups of coffee. And I thought of all the doors we'd knocked on, all the kitchens where hope had been passed around like sugar and cream. We hadn't marched or shouted, we hadn't broken laws or headlines, but we'd changed something just the same, quietly, persistently, with each conversation and each sale. We'd taught the world that the smallest revolutions often start with a smile, a cup of coffee, and the courage to say, "I can do this." Sometimes I see the world now, women in offices, women running companies, women leading, and I wonder if they know how it all began. Maybe they don't, but maybe they don't need to, because the proof of it lives on in every woman who earns her place, in every granddaughter who presses down a plastic lid and hears the sound of possibility. When I go, I told Lucy, she can have my old set. She laughed, said she'd probably keep snacks in them. That's fine, because one day, maybe she'll hear that little burp and remember her grandmother's story, not about plastic or parties, but about the power that comes from believing you can do more. Now, when the house is quiet and the evening sun turns the kitchen golden, I still hear echoes of those old gatherings, the laughter, the clink of cups, the rustle of catalogs. Sometimes I swear I can smell the coffee and the perfume again, and if I close my eyes, I see us young, hopeful, sleeves rolled up, standing around a living room table with nothing but faith and a handful of plastic. We were selling bowls, yes, but we were also selling freedom, the kind that comes with choice, friendship, and a dream sealed tight against the doubt of the world. So when people ask what it all meant, what Tupperware really was, I just smile. It was the sound, I tell them, the sound of women learning they were strong enough to make their own future. And sometimes, when no one's around, I pressed down one last lid, just to hear it again. Burp. Still perfect after all these years. Sometimes history doesn't live in books, it lives in kitchens, in laughter, and in memories like these. If this story touched your heart, don't let it fade into silence. Your like keeps these memories alive. Your comment reminds us that stories still matter, and your subscription helps our small channel grow so we can keep telling the tales of people who built the world we live in. Because here, on Back When Stories, we don't just remember the past, we feel it. So if you're still here, thank you for listening, for caring, for remembering. See you in the next story.